The promotion had been 6 weeks delayed when James came home on a Thursday and said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "Yes." He said, "My mother mentioned something at lunch." He said, "She said she heard they are doing extra checks at your work before the promotion." I said, "She said what?" He said, "She said she heard they are doing extra checks." I said, "James." He said, "I know." I said, "Who told her there were extra checks?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "James, have you told her about the audit?" He said, "No." He said, "I told her about the promotion 5 months ago." I said, "At the dinner?" He said, "Yes." I said, "And the audit?" He said, "I have not told anyone about the audit." I said, "The audit was not announced internally." I said, "The audit was a pre-promotion review that Edward and I discussed in a meeting that was not minuted." He said, "Yes." I said, "The only way your mother knows about extra checks is if she is the reason for them." He said, "Yes." He was quiet. I was quiet. The kitchen was very still. I want to tell you about the kitchen, because the kitchen is where I did the thinking in this account. And the thinking is the most important part of what I want to give you. The kitchen is where I cook and where I work in the evenings and where I have been working toward the head of contracts role for 4 years. 4 years of evenings at this table. 4 years of contracts review and framework building, and the specific accumulated competence that comes from doing a complicated thing very carefully for a long time. I had been doing it for 4 years, and I had been close to the role for 4 months. And then, 6 weeks ago, Edward had called me in and said, "We are conducting a pre-promotion review." He had said, "It is a standard procedure." He had said, "I want you to know it is a positive sign." He had not said what had prompted it. He had not said, "Someone called me." I had not known what had prompted it. I had thought it was standard. James came home on a Thursday and said my mother heard they are doing extra checks, and I understood, in the kitchen that has 4 years of my work in it, that nothing about the review had been standard. My name is Claire. I am 36 years old. I am now head of contracts at the company I have been building toward for 4 years. I want to tell you how I got there from the Thursday evening in the kitchen, with precision and in the correct order. Because the correct order is the thing that produced the outcome. I want to tell you about Diane before I give you the 3 things I did. Because Diane is the architecture of this account, and I want you to have her full picture. Diane is 61. She is James's mother. She spent 22 years of her career as an HR director at the company where I now work. She left 8 years ago, before I joined. She had contacts there. She knew Edward, not well. They had overlapped briefly in her final 2 years, but she had his professional details, and she had the kind of access that comes from having been an HR director at a company. The knowledge of people, the knowledge of processes, the knowledge of which concern, raised in which way, by which kind of source, would produce which kind of review. She had that knowledge. She had used it. She had contacted Edward presenting herself as a former colleague with a professional concern. She had said, "I understand you have a promotion under consideration for a contracts manager." She had said, "I want to raise something in confidence." She had said, "I have heard from a reliable source that this individual has a history of document irregularities at a previous employer." She had said, "I thought you should look carefully before proceeding." She had not given her name. She had not identified herself as the candidate's mother-in-law. She had presented as a professional acting from professional concern. Edward, who is a careful man and a good manager, had not promoted anyone without checking. He had initiated the review. The review had produced nothing, because there was nothing to produce. I had no document irregularities at any employer. I had no disciplinary record of any kind. I had a 6-year record at my previous employer that was entirely clean, which Edward's review had confirmed, but the review had taken 6 weeks and the promotion had waited for the review, and Diane had known it would. She had known exactly which lever to pull. She had pulled it with precision. She had also, at a family lunch with her son, mentioned hearing about extra checks. That was the error. Not the pulling of the lever. The mention. A person who had initiated a false professional concern would not have mentioned hearing about extra checks unless she had been careless, or unless she had not believed that James would tell me, or unless she had underestimated, across the years she had known me, the specific quality of my attention. She had underestimated it. I had been paying it for 4 years at the kitchen table. I paid it on the Thursday evening. I said to James, "I need to think." He said, "Yes." I said, "I'm going to think tonight and tell you what I need from you tomorrow." He said, "Yes." He said, "Claire." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm going to do whatever you need." I said, "I know." I said, "I need tonight first. The 3 things." I thought that night and I arrived at 3 things. I want to give them to you in the order. I did them because the order was deliberate, and the deliberateness is part of the account. The first thing, the letter. On the Friday morning, I called the HR director at my previous employer. Her name is Nadine. We had worked together well during my 6 years there, and she had given me a reference when I joined my current company. I said, "Nadine," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I'm going to tell you why." She said, "Yes." I told her what had happened. The audit. The concern raised about document irregularities. The anonymous professional. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Claire," she said, "I want you to know that there is no record of any kind in your file here that would support that description." I said, "I know." I said, "I need it in writing." She said, "I will have it to you by end of day." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I will be better when I have the letter." She said, "You will have it by 5. She was as good as her word. The letter arrived at 16:52. It was on headed paper. It said, in the formal language of HR documentation, "This letter confirms that Claire Hartley was employed by this organization in the role of contracts manager from April 2015 to September 2021. Her performance record throughout this period was strong, and she met or exceeded all performance indicators in each annual review. Ms. Hartley left the organization of her own accord and in good standing. There is no record of any disciplinary action, performance improvement procedure, or concern regarding document management in her employment file. She was a valued member of the contracts team and is held in high regard by this organization." It was signed by Nadine, with her title and the company's official stamp. I printed it. I put it in a document wallet. I put the document wallet in my bag. It was the first thing. The second thing, the solicitor. On Saturday morning, I called a solicitor who specializes in employment law. I had her details from a previous matter that was unrelated and minor. I called her on a Saturday because she had a weekend line, and because I wanted to understand my position before Monday. She answered. I told her the situation. She said, "I need to ask you some questions." She asked them. Then she said, "What you are describing, if accurate, is potentially tortious interference with employment and defamation of professional character." She said, "The anonymous nature of the communication does not protect the person who made it." She said, "If you can establish who made the communication and that it was false, and that it was made deliberately, for the purpose of interfering with your promotion, you have a viable claim." She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to understand my options. I want to know what I have available to me before I decide what to use." She said, "That is the correct approach." She gave me the full picture. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Call me when you have decided." I said, "I will." I hung up. I had the letter. I had the solicitor's assessment. I had the options. I had one more thing to do before deciding which to use. The third thing, James. On Saturday evening, I said to James, "I need you to do one thing." He said, "Yes." I said, "I need you to talk to your mother." I said, "I need you to confirm what she did." I said, "And then I need you to tell her exactly what happens next." He said, "Yes." He said, "I need to ask her directly before I go further." I said, "Yes." He said, "I will call her tonight." He called her in the kitchen while I was in the next room. I heard his side and he told me hers. He had said, "Mum, I need to ask you something directly." He had said, "Did you contact anyone at Claire's company about the promotion?" She had said, "I was only trying to help." He had said, "Help who?" She had said, "I was concerned." He had said, "Concerned about what?" She had said, "About the fit. About whether they were being thorough enough." He had said, "Mum." He had said, "You contacted her employer without identifying yourself and told them she had document irregularities." She had said, "I only said they should look carefully." He had said, "On what basis did you say that?" She had said, "I thought it was worth raising." He had said, "Mum." He had said, "There are no document irregularities." He had said, "There has never been a document irregularity." He had said, "There is a letter from her previous employer that says so." She had been quiet. He had said, "Her promotion has been delayed by 6 weeks because of a false concern raised under a false identity." She had said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." He had said, "What did you mean for it to go?" She had said nothing. He had said, "Mum." He had said, "What you did has a name." He had said, "In an employment context, raising a false concern about a candidate's professional record to their employer is defamation of professional character." He had said, "I am not threatening you with this." He had said, "I am telling you so that you understand the weight of what happened." She had said, "I was trying to look after you." He had said, "By doing what?" She had said, "By making sure." He had said, "By making sure what?" She had been quiet. He had said, "Mum, you were trying to remove a role from my wife because you did not want her to have it." He had said, "That is not looking after me." He had said, "That is controlling the shape of my life by interfering with hers." He had said, "And you used your old contacts at her company to do it without leaving your name." He had said, "I need you to hear me say that clearly." She had said, "James." He had said, "Yes." He had said, "Here is what happens now." He had said, "You are going to contact Edward this week." He had said, "You are going to tell him you were mistaken." He had said, "You are going to correct the record you contaminated." She had said, "I can't." He had said, "This week, Mum." He had said, "Or Claire uses what she has." She had said, "She wouldn't." He had said, "She absolutely would." He had said, "And she would be right to." He had said, "But I'm asking her to give you this one opportunity." He had said, "The opportunity is open this week." He had said, "After this week it is not." He came into the room where I was. He sat down. He said, "She will do it." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "You do not need to be sorry." I said, "You did the right thing." He said, "She has had a view of you that I have not fully addressed for years." I said, "I know." He said, "I thought the view was softening." I said, "I know." He said, "The view was not softening." I said, "No." He said, It was waiting for an opportunity. I said, yes. He said, Claire. I said, yes. He said, I want to say something. I said, yes. He said, I am proud of what you have built. He said, I am proud of the letter. I said, the letter is just evidence. He said, no. He said, the letter is the record. He said, it says 6 years. It says valued. It says no disciplinary action of any kind. He said, that is not just evidence. He said, that is who you are in writing. I said, yes. He said, and she cannot touch it. I said, no. I said, she cannot. The Edward conversation. I want to give you this because it is the most professional part of the account, and because it produced the most important piece of the record. On Monday morning, I went to Edward's office and I said, Edward, I would like to understand the pre-promotion review. He said, of course. He said, as I mentioned, it is a standard procedure. I said, Edward. I said, I want to ask you something directly. I said, was the review prompted by a third-party communication? He was quiet for a moment. He said, we did receive some information. I said, can you tell me the nature of the information? He said, there was a concern raised about document management at a previous employer. He said it carefully. He said it in the tone of a man who is not certain he should be saying it, and who is saying it because he has decided that the person in front of him deserves to know. I said, I see. Edward. I said, I have a letter from my previous employer. I put the document wallet on his desk. He opened it. He read the letter. He read it carefully and fully. When he finished, he put it down on the desk. He said, Claire. I said, there is no document irregularity. There has never been a document irregularity. The letter is signed by the HR director of my previous employer. He said, yes. He said, I can see that. I said, I would like to add this letter to my personnel file here. He said, yes. He said, of course. I said, I would also like to ask one more thing. I said, did the third party identify themselves? He said, no. He said, they presented as a former colleague. He said, they did not give a name. I said, I appreciate you telling me that. He said, Claire. He said, I want you to know that the review found nothing of concern. He said, the promotion process is continuing. I said, thank you, Edward. I left. I went back to my desk. I sat at my desk. I had 4 years of work on my computer, and in the company's systems, and in the relationships I had built with the contracts team and with the clients. 4 years. The letter was in Edward's in tray, going to my file. The third party had not given their name. The concern had been addressed by the letter. The record was complete. I went back to work. That afternoon, I received a message from Diane's phone that simply said, I have spoken to Edward. James says you will decide what happens next. I read it. I put the phone down. I went back to the contract I was reviewing. The correction was made. The file was clean. I had the solicitor. I had the letter. I had the options. I chose the letter and the correction. I chose them because James had asked me to give her the opportunity, and because James asking me was itself a thing I held in high regard. He had asked, not pressured, and the asking was from a position of understanding both what she had done and what it had cost. I made the choice from that position. I did not make it from weakness. I made it from the specific clarity of someone who has the full case assembled, and who chooses not to deploy it, not because the case is weak, but because the correction is sufficient, and the record is clean, and the promotion is coming, and the letter is in the file. I made it because I could. The case was there if I needed it. I did not need it. The promotion. 3 weeks after the letter went into my file, Edward called me in. He said, "Claire, I am pleased to tell you that the board has approved the appointment of head of contracts." He said, "We would like to offer you the role." He said, "The package details are here." He put a document in front of me. I read it. I said, "Yes, I accept." He said, "I am glad." He said, "You have built something real in this company over 4 years." He said, "I want you to know that the review process did not change our view of your work. It confirmed it." I said, "Thank you, Edward." He said, "Welcome to the leadership team, head of contracts." I went back to my desk. I sat down. I looked at the screen. I thought about the 4 years. The evenings at the kitchen table, the frameworks I had built, the contracts I had reviewed, the specific accumulated competence that had been there before Diane made her call, and that was there after it, and that the letter confirmed, and that the promotion now formally acknowledged. I thought about Diane's call. I thought about the 6 weeks. I thought about the extra checks. I thought about James coming home on a Thursday and saying, "I need to tell you something." I thought about the kitchen where I thought overnight and arrived at 3 things. The letter, the solicitor, James. I had used 2 of the 3. The third, the solicitor, the case, the full legal weight of what Diane had done remained available and unused, and I had chosen not to deploy it. I sat at my desk and I looked at the screen and I thought, the promotion is mine. The letter is in the file. The record is clean. The case is assembled and held and will remain held as long as the correction stands. The correct outcome has been produced by the correct means. I am head of contracts. I went back to work. That is what the promotion felt like from the inside. Not a release or a relief or a triumph. A continuation. The correct continuation of 4 years of correct work. That is what the promotion was. It is still what it is now, which is not a thing that can be reached by a call made from an old HR contact list to a manager who trusted the concern because it sounded professional. It is not reachable from there. It is reachable only from the kitchen table and the 4 years and the letter from Nadine on headed paper. That is where it came from. That is where it lives. The coffee. 6 weeks after the promotion, I called Diane and I said, "I would like to meet." She said, "Yes." We met at a coffee place near her house on a Tuesday at 11. She was there when I arrived. She looked smaller to me than she had the last time I had seen her, which was a family dinner 4 months before everything. I sat down. I did not take my coat off. I ordered a coffee. I said, "Diane," I said, "I am going to say something and I am going to say it once." She said, "Yes." I said, "You contacted my employer using your professional contacts from that company, presenting yourself as a former colleague with a professional concern. You made a false claim about my employment history. The claim was that I had a history of document irregularities. The claim was false. It delayed my promotion by 6 weeks." She said, "I know." I said, "I have the letter from my previous employer. I have spoken to a solicitor. I have the correction you made to Edward." I said, "I am not going to pursue this legally." She said, I said, "I am not finished." She said, "Yes." I said, "I am not pursuing this legally because James asked me to give you the opportunity to correct the record, and you corrected it, and I am choosing to accept the correction as sufficient." I said, "That is my choice. It is not a reflection of what you did being acceptable. It is a reflection of what I am choosing to do with what you did." She said, "I understand." I said, "I don't think you fully understand yet." I said, "But I want to give you the information so that you can arrive at a full understanding in whatever time it takes." She said, "Yes." I said, I have been head of contracts for 6 weeks. She said, yes. I said, I worked for that role for 4 years. Evenings. Frameworks. A specific and accumulated competence that was there before your call and is there after it. She said, I know. I said, you tried to reach it from the wrong direction. You used a professional claim under a false identity at the company, where you used to have contacts. That is the direction you tried to reach it from. She said, I said, Diane. She said, yes. I said, the direction you tried does not reach the thing I have built. She said, I understand that now. I said, the things I have built have my name on them. I said, not in any document that can be contacted by an anonymous third party. In the record. She said, the record. I said, yes. I said, the letter, the 4 years, the promotion, the work. The record is not reachable from the direction you tried. She was quiet. I picked up my coffee. I said, I'm glad we talked. She said, Claire. I said, yes. She said, I am sorry. She said it without the performance of it, without the elaboration. Just, I'm sorry. I said, I hear you. I said, give my love to James's father. I put on my coat. I left. I walked to the car. I sat in the car for a moment. I thought, the record is mine. It is in the file. It has my name on it. Nadine's signature. The official stamp. The promotion. All of it mine. Not reachable from a phone call with old contacts and a false professional identity. I started the car. I drove back to work. Here is my question for you. Mine used her old HR contacts at my company to make a false professional claim against me anonymously. She delayed my promotion by 6 weeks. My husband gave her 1 week to correct the record. She did. I chose the letter over the lawsuit. Would you have made the same choice? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. I want to tell you about the morning after the coffee. Because the morning after is not a dramatic morning. And I want you to have it because the undramatic morning is also the account. I woke at 6:30. James was already up. He had made coffee. He was at the kitchen table with his phone. I came in. I said, morning. He said, how are you? I said, I am fine. He said, the coffee was yesterday. I said, yes. He said, how did it go? I said what I needed to say. I said it once and I did not go back over it. He said, good. He said, did she hear you? I said, I think she heard the beginning of it. I said, the full understanding takes longer. He said, yes. He said, I think that is right. He poured me a coffee. We sat at the table for a while. Then I said, James. He said, yes. I said, the 4 years are still the 4 years. He said, yes. I said, the promotion is still the promotion. He said, yes. I said, the letter is still in the file. He said, yes. He said, none of those things were touched. I said, no. He said, she tried to reach them from the wrong direction. I said, yes. The direction does not reach the thing. He said, that is the whole of it. He said, that is the thing she did not understand. I said, yes. He said, she understood power in a specific form. Institutional knowledge, old contacts, professional processes. He said, she did not understand that those things do not reach what you built at this table. I said, no. I said, they do not reach it. He said, and she knows that now. I said, yes. He said, and we are here. I said, yes. I said, We are here. The kitchen was the kitchen. The table was the table. 4 years of evenings and the letter in the file and head of contracts and the coffee getting cold, and both of us at the table. That is the morning after. That is the complete picture. I am telling you about the morning after, because the morning after is the measure of a thing. The day following the hard thing. The day in which the hard thing has been managed and the regular life continues, is the thing that tells you what the hard thing was for. The morning after was a regular morning. The coffee was hot. The kitchen was the kitchen. I went to work. I am still going to work. I am head of contracts. The record is mine. That is the complete account. I have been thinking about whether to add anything else and I have decided not to. The morning after is the ending. The regular morning that follows a managed thing is the answer to the question of whether the managed thing was worth it. The answer is yes. The morning is always yes. I want to tell you one more thing about what it means to have spent 22 years as an HR director and to use that knowledge against your son's wife. Diane had 22 years of the specific knowledge of how concerns are processed, how anonymous professional communications are handled, which kind of concern produces which kind of review, and what happens to a promotion when a review is initiated. She had that knowledge because she had built it over 22 years as a professional. She had used it. She had pulled the right lever with precision. She had known it would work. What she had not known, I think, is what I had built in 4 years of evenings at the kitchen table. She had known I was a contracts manager. She had not known the specific depth of the record I had at my previous employer, or the relationship I had with Nadine, or the specific quality of attention I bring to a situation that requires a response. She had the lever. I had the record. The record was the thing that the lever could not move. The promotion was the confirmation that the record is what matters. Not the lever. Not the old contacts. Not the anonymous professional concern. The record. The record is what I had, and what I have, and what no call from an old HR contact list can reach. Diane built 22 years of professional knowledge and used it against me, and discovered that the thing she used it against was not reachable from there. That is also the account. That is the last thing I want to say about it.